Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Resilient Voices. We have Shabbos Kestenbaum, probably the hottest influencer coming from Teaneck, New Jersey, before my dad came in as the influencer from Teaneck, New Jersey.
Got a lot of competition.
Just spoke at the RNC really well, speaking across the world, talking about a few things. One, that he's actually taking a stand against the universities and combating anti-Semitism. He's starting with Harvard, but probably he'll get to the other couple. He's one of seven. He's an exclusive, so everybody knows that he's not actually from, where do you say people?
I'm not actually from Riverdale. I'm actually from Teaneck. I moved to Riverdale when I was 13. So I just tell the media that, I'm a scrappy kid from the Bronx, but the reality is I'm from the suburbs.
Yeah, I like how people think Riverdale is really from the Bronx, even though it technically is from the Bronx, but it doesn't make you very scrappy if you're from Riverdale.
Well, we like to play it up to the media. So, just, this stays between us.
It's a Richie Torres
exactly.
move. Yeah. I mean, whatever. It's
What's like, you mean Teaneck's not scrappy? Is that what you mean?
No.
Teaneck, New Jersey, not scrappy.
Especially Winthrop Road.
Winthrop Road. Yeah, they just sold a house there for like $6 million.
They keep trying to sell the same house, $5 million year after year.
They'll get there eventually. But Shabbos, thank you so much for coming today. Thank you for honestly doing everything you're doing. When I look around and I see other people who are fighting side to side with us, I see you right there, and you're pushing every single day, and you're really just trying to bring awareness. So can you give us your origin story and then what you're doing right now? And then I have a bunch of questions for you.
Sure. Let's get right into it. So I'm a first generation American. I grew up with Jewish values and American values, never seeing those two as contradictory. In fact, they're quite complementary. The same values of freedom and liberty and justice that we're taught as Americans are very much taught in the Jewish community. I came to Harvard after being in an all-male yeshiva in the Old City of Jerusalem, Aish Torah, and after working in informal Jewish education, both at SAR High School and at the National Council of Synagogue Youth. And I wanted to explore theology from an academic, pluralistic, secular perspective. And what's funny is, as I was applying to Harvard, I reached out to the very few Orthodox Jews who had done that. And they all told me not to do it. Anti-Israelism, anti-Semitism, it's not particularly academically rigorous. Most people are not theologically inclined, meaning that there's a lot of social activism or political sloganeering that's masquerading as religion. But I decided to ignore that. I was and still sort of am a liberal. And I felt that I was ready to confront challenges and ready to explore my identity in a new perspective. What I discovered very quickly, I mean, we're talking in a couple of weeks of me being at Harvard, it was not the purported institution that cares about intellectual diversity, that champions the rights of all minorities. I mean, we'll talk about it in a moment, but it was so pervasive and systemic as it pertains to anti-Israelism, anti-Semitism, and anti-intellectualism, I'd even argue.
So when did you first see that, and what was your feeling once you got to that point? And also getting into Harvard, not really a dummy getting into Harvard.
I don't want to brag. I'm on a full scholarship.
Oh, that's good. That's an extra dummy.
Actually, I'll tell you something
extra
funny.
Non-dummy.
Where this stays between us and the millions of viewers. We're suing Harvard, obviously. And
Who's we?
Me, but I say we because it sounds better. There are 5 other plaintiffs, but they're anonymous. They don't want to be involved, and they've asked me to really not talk.
And
about
who's funding it?
We have generous supporters. I don't think I'm at liberty to say who they are, but people in the community who have financial means and were really from day one invested in this, not just financially, but also they really believe in our cause.
And you're using attorneys, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah, and they're not pro bono. So
they're not pro bono.
No, Kasowitz Benson Torres is an aggressive litigation firm based here in New York. Mark Kasowitz actually.
They're the ones that took out NYU. They just got a settlement for NYU.
Exactly. So Mark Kasowitz used to represent Donald Trump, which I always thought was very cool. But then, Trump got indicted 34 times. So not a good omen, but he's great.
He need more lawyers.
Yeah, exactly. So Kasowitz is representing students at Harvard, students at NYU, students at Columbia and Penn, all separate lawsuits, but all the same firm. We picked them really for 3 reasons. Number one, as we said, they're not pro bono. And to me, that's actually a tremendous advantage. Had we gone with Stand With Us or the Lawfare Project, both great organizations, it would not have elicited the outrage that it deserves, because those 2 organizations are literally built for the purpose of suing universities for anti-Semitism. So if we went through it, yeah, the Jews are suing because that's what they do. Kasowitz doesn't do this. The fact that they're taking this on in such an incredible way, and they're devoting so many of their resources to this, clearly shows how out of hand anti-Semitism is at Harvard and all these institutions.
Are they charging you a full fee? Is it a full fee? You don't have to say, but
I don't know if I'm at liberty to say, but let's just say I can't afford it. And we have backers who can and are spending significant
No,
amounts.
but is
to do so.
Casowitz giving a discount, like they're doing it as a passion project, or they're doing it just specifically because they're making money and it's like, or they?
I'll put it, regardless of how, whether they're making a profit on this, I genuinely don't know. What I will say is my lawyers are dedicated to this. They are outraged at what Jewish students have been going through. They really care. They are genuine. I've had dozens of phone calls and emails and meetings. If they didn't believe in this, they wouldn't have taken.
And everybody has to make a living. They still have to live.
Everyone has to make a living. Exactly. So we picked them because of that. They're incentivized to win. If there's a cash settlement or if there's some type of monetary payoff. And as I said, they have a tremendous amount of resources. They handle multi-million, if not billion-dollar cases. They have staff that far exceeds the other Jewish nonprofits. So we thought it was kind of a no-brainer. And as you mentioned, the settlement from NYU is unbelievable. It is almost exactly what I would agree to. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but if my terms are met similar to what NYU had, I'd be okay with it. Yeah.
Really? So go back. Sorry for interrupting and asking you the financial questions. It is a financial podcast.
Yeah, that's what. Look, we're also Jews.
We also have to know.
Don't tell the anti-Semites at Harvard who said that.
We want a discount. I mean, come on.
How much can we get off versus the other people?
Exactly.
So continue. Yeah, continue telling us kind of what you were saying before.
Sure. So I came to Harvard to be part of a community and learn from that community, but I discovered very quickly that was not the case. So as I'm sure is infamously known by the general public at this point, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expressions, FIRE, they ranked 248 universities in the United States as it pertains to free speech. How open are they to dialogue? How open are they to controversial speakers? Harvard was ranked 248th out of 248 universities. Wow. They got a special distinction of being so terrible. This is not an institution that values free speech. They routinely rescind speakers that are controversial. They decided to rescind the acceptances of about a dozen students who were found to have been posting on a private WhatsApp group racist and sexist memes. So whether those things are good or bad, whether they should or shouldn't do those things, it's irrelevant. That is the culture at Harvard. Now, here's where it gets really problematic. My first month of being a student at Harvard, the Palestine Solidarity Committee, which are comprised of some of the most intellectually challenged individuals I've ever met in my life, they decided to invite Muhammad al-Kurd. This would be the third time that he would come to campus. For those who don't know, Muhammad al-Kurd routinely features on the Anti-Defamation League's top 10 anti-Semites. He's someone who believes that Jews eat the organs of Palestinians, who believes that the Israeli occupying forces have internalized the ways of Nazi Germany. And for those of you who have the misfortune of being on Twitter, he mourned the fact that Palestinians can no longer hijack planes anymore. He said that on Twitter. So this is someone who's vehemently anti-Semitic. So we went to the administration. This is my first month of being a student. We went to the administration and said, look, you have a strong track record of rescinding invitations to speakers. You have a strong track record of making it your business to protect minority groups, which I can give you more examples later on. Why don't you rescind the invitation of a noted anti-Semite who actively, through his rhetoric, puts Jews in danger? And the answer we got was, well, he has a First Amendment right. What do you want us to do about it? Besides the fact he doesn't have a First Amendment right, because universities are not bound by the First Amendment, which is an interesting conversation for later. But that is a shocking double standard to say that we are going to protect the transgender community by not having transphobic speakers. We're going to protect the African-American community by not having racist speakers. But when it comes to anti-Semites, yeah, he has a right. What do you want us to do about it? That is a double standard. And there's no other way to conceive of such a double standard other than it's anti-Semitism. That is my first month of being a Harvard student.
So how'd they react to that? Obviously, they didn't rescind him.
Obviously, they didn't rescind him. So we had a peaceful protest outside. And protesting is great. The only difference between me and our ideological adversaries is we believe in peacefully protesting. We had a peaceful demonstration showing why we were so bothered and frustrated with a speaker like this. We had Israeli and American flags, of course. We spoke about what it means when someone denigrates our religious identity, because of course Zionism is a core component of who we are as Orthodox Jews, or Jews broadly speaking. But it went on as usual.
But just to clarify, I mean, is it occurring to you at this time that maybe Harvard is not the place for you to be, and perhaps some of those people that you spoke to that said maybe it's not, maybe they were right, and maybe because you're not it doesn't sound like you're there to change Harvard. You're there to pursue your academic career. And it doesn't sound like it's working out. I
certainly recognize now that they are right. And if they're listening, I won't say their names, but if they're listening, they know who they are. They're right and I was wrong and I'm sorry. I knew that there would be a problem of this anti-Zionist, anti-Israel rhetoric. I could never have imagined what it turned into on the night of October 7th and afterwards. But yes, it did dawn on me relatively quickly that the problem was actually much larger than I realized. I was the only Jew at Harvard Divinity School who wore a keepa, the only one who was keeping kosher or the Sabbath, which there's nothing wrong with that. That's not institutionally problematic, but it underscores that ideologically and religiously, I was quite alone. And then, as I said, that feeling of alone turned into nefarious anti-Semitism very, very quickly.
When you felt alone, how did you keep pushing? Why were you able to keep standing up? Why would you wear a kippah? When I was in the army, for example, and I was religious coming from community, but I wasn't as religious as other people. And then all of a sudden what happened was they would slowly take their kippahs off, because the Army and the IDF in general is not the most religious institution. There's units that are religious, but if you go into like the main brigades, it's not very religious. So I felt most of the people who were keeping Shabbat stopped keeping Shabbat, who were wearing kippahs, who were not wearing kippahs, which it lends to why it's so controversial with what's going on with the drafting of the Hasidic community, because they're very scared of that. And there is something to be said about that part. But what happens is everybody became less and less religious. I actually became religious. I wasn't keeping Shabbat, and I started keeping Shabbat in the army. I wasn't keeping kosher at all, and I started keeping kosher in the army. I went the complete opposite way. Why didn't you take off your kippah? Why did you come to this and feel like, hey, I'm alone, let me just continue?
Well, I don't want to delude myself into thinking that I am a figure for being a passionate Orthodox religious Jew. It was certainly hard for me to be kovea itim l'Torah, to set times to study Torah while I was at Harvard. It was certainly difficult for me to refrain from, secular culture, and I'll be very vague as to what that means. But in terms of the kippah specifically, I mean, a keepa was never it was never a consideration once that I would take it off. I mean, that is a core part of my religious identity. It externally represents my values and my faith. And in fact, after October 7th, I bought a bigger keepa. So were there moments where I felt like just take it off because it'll be easier? Yeah, of course. But ultimately, I am not going to change my behaviors, my attitudes, or my actions to accommodate other people's hatred, bigotry, and discrimination. So not once did it ever occur to me to take it off.
That was amazing.
Thanks.
Yeah. So
I sort of feel the same way. Like, I'll go everywhere. We'll go on conferences in the Midwest. I wear my kippah. I don't care. This is who I am.
Yeah.
That's it. That's as far as I think about it.
And by the way, just in the last 2 weeks, I was at the Republican National Convention. I was walking the streets of LA. I was at the Christians United for Israel Summit in DC. And the amount of people who've stopped me to hug me, to tell me that they're praying for the Jewish people, to tell me that they have the hostage posters in their window front in Iowa. I mean, it's quite amazing.
It is. I've had that actually too. I've been at conferences. People see my kippah and they come up to me. We support you. This and that and the other thing. That's why I've actually spoken to people when I was in Tel Aviv at a restaurant. There's a waitress came by. She says, "Oh, I just think everybody hates us." I say you would be surprised how much real support there is, but it's just not loud.
Yeah, and politically speaking, the Israel-Gaza conflict has really dominated national media and the news cycle. But the reality is so much of what's happening on college campuses really do exist in a vacuum. I mean, there certainly are exceptions, like what we saw in LA, those riots in front of the synagogue, what we're seeing on the streets of New York. There certainly are exceptions. But when the Harvard-Harris poll, ironically, it was a Harvard-Harris poll, came out with the top 15 issues that young voters feel passionate about, the Israel-Gaza war ranked 13. It's not really something that most people care too much about. And yes, there is pervasive anti-Semitism, both within academia and within American society, broadly speaking. At the same time, our ideological allies vastly outnumber our foes. And what's happening on campuses really don't reflect, I would say, broader American sympathies. I just don't see the data that supports
I would say the same thing. I have one of my youngest sons. He just graduated from Rutgers, and they had some protests on there, the same type of thing. And I would ask him about it. Yeah, they're protesting, but so what?
Yeah, and I also think what really helps our cause is the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, those on the opposite spectrum are just so intellectually challenged. I mean, sort of like how a heroin addict cannot help himself when he sees heroin, he has to shoot up. So too, when our opponents see an American flag, they simply can't help themselves. They just have to set it on fire. And the American people see that, and they see these protesters for what they are. They're anti-American, they're anti-Western, they're obviously anti-Semitic, and Americans repudiate those values.
What was the difference between pre-October 7th and post-October 7th for you?
Sure. So for me personally, and I get so much criticism, and it's such BS that I am the self-acclaimed spokesman for the Harvard Jewish community, which is just not true. So I will talk about myself and my personal experiences. At Harvard Divinity School, it was particularly challenging, not just being the only Orthodox Jew, but being in an environment where the state of Israel is denigrated, where the state of Israel is racism, it's apartheid, it's settler colonialism, it's genocide. This is way before October 7th. And there were instances of anti-Semitism. So for example, at one of the undergraduate houses, there were swastikas being drawn. It didn't really elicit outrage, certainly not within the national media, but even internally within Harvard. No one really spoke about it. Harvard pretended the problem didn't exist, but it was happening. And I would add that there's this misconception that after October 7th, things just exploded. Yes, things got exponentially worse, but it wasn't after October 7th. It was the night of October 7th. We cannot let our ideological opponents off the hook for their atrocious behavior on the night of the slaughter of women and babies, on the night of mass systemic rapes. We cannot let them off the hook for that. So I was at the Harvard Hillel and the Harvard Chabad, the two Jewish organizations on campus, and there were all these rumors that began circulating. There was a stabbing, there was a kidnapping, and as we all know, the realities of having the state of Israel in the 21st century is, there's terrorism. I myself remember when I was in yeshiva, my second year, there was a terrorist attack a block away from where I go to the mikveh, the ritual bath for spiritual reasons. And that was a reality. We confront it. We pray. We hope it doesn't happen again, but it is what it is. What can we do?
It's the same thing. You live in San Francisco and there's homeless people on the street and they're doing damage, or you live in New York City and there's crime and there's all these issues.
Exactly.
You just kind of just go, that's part of it. And like, we hope it doesn't happen to us. We know what happened to the person down the block from us, but you be careful, you watch your back. It's hard to, but you just kind of get accustomed to it. And I find that the Israeli resilience is really something that's impressive, that they're able, and the Jewish resilience is that we're able to just take what's going on and continuously move forward instead of constantly being scared. I wouldn't say scared. I would say paralyzed by things that can be traumatic.
Well, I would add, as a young person, someone who did not grow up during Israel as an existential issue, someone who grew up with the conception of Israel as a place where your family lives, a place where you visit your grandparents and go for Passover vacation, October 7th cemented that we cannot and should not take Israel for granted. So as these rumors at the Harvard Hillel and Harvard Chabad persisted, and it became clear that something much bigger than we could have imagined or envisioned, I, for the very first time in my life, used my phone on a Jewish holiday on the Sabbath, and I began calling my family to make sure they were okay. As I was doing that, and as many other Jewish students at Harvard were doing that, in fact, I would argue, now I will speak on behalf of the Jewish community, I would say the majority, if not maybe the plurality, but probably the majority were doing that. We had 34 student groups representing more than 1,000 students see exactly what was happening on their phones, on TV. And their reaction was to jump out of bed, some still in their pajamas, to draft what they called an emergency statement to blame Jews for the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust as it was happening. And the very first line of their statement is, "We hold the Israeli regime entirely responsible for all the violence ongoing in the Middle East." That is how they began their statement. And I'll say something.
Who is this? Who is doing this?
34 student groups at Harvard University representing more than 1,000 students. And just days later, they hold a protest about, again, 1,000 Harvard students and professors. And a student, his name is Kojo, he gets up and he says that Hamas will be remembered as freedom fighters. And we stand with the resistance. And he says this to thunderous applause. I recognize some professors in that rally. I recognize some friends, now former friends, in that rally. So MLK has this great line, "We will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." I mean, I wouldn't even say we had the silence of our friends. We had the active encouragement of our friends of the murder and rape and wholesale slaughter of Jewish people. And I would also add, this did not get enough attention because I was the only one, or one of very few, I should say, at Harvard Divinity School who believe in the existence of the state of Israel. But in our student WhatsApp group of Harvard Divinity School students, someone had written on the night of October 7th that he was organizing a rally called "Long Live the Palestinian Resistance, Victory is Ours." And the reaction by my classmates was as if they were organizing a picnic in the park. Can I bring my dog? Is this open to the community? How can I help? I'd love to make some signs.
But let's understand a little bit also. I mean, we know that a lot of people are going to protests, but they really, they're just like going along with the crowd. They don't really have they're not really making a conscious decision. I'm not excusing anything, of course. But, you know, a lot of times I'm finding that people are just, you know, they don't really know. So it's like the cool thing to do. So that's motivating them.
I have two answers. Number one, Dr. Einat Wilf, who's phenomenal.
Yeah, she's wonderful.
Yeah, should have her on the podcast.
I should. Everyone, it's been mentioned a few times. I'll get her.
So Dr. Einat Wilf has this great saying that we need to treat Palestinians like the adults they are. We need to treat them like the adults they are. Oh, they don't really mean it. And they're using October 7th because they've been oppressed for decades. No. Listen to the rhetoric that comes out of their mouths and look at the actions that they undertake. So too, Harvard students, the intent is irrelevant. The effect is what matters. And the effect was you had the promotion, the normalization, and the celebration of the murder of Jewish people. And again, we have to stop making excuses for these students that they didn't know. It's true, some of them don't know. And maybe that's better, that they're just ignorant and intellectually challenged and stupid. But many do know. And I would argue that the majority at Harvard, at least, do know.
Yeah, and they've been very well educated. They didn't get there by accident.
As much as I make fun of Harvard and I call my classmates morons, because I believe many of them are, they did get in, most of them at least, on academic merits.
Yeah, 95%, 98% got into this.
They know what an intifada is.
Yeah.
They know what an intifada is. They know what freeing Palestine from the river to the sea means. They know that the Ayatollah in Iran has told them to say that. They know all this. And they also know that Jewish students for months have been trying to explain to the Harvard community and to the world why those words and why those actions are so dangerous. And they simply do not care. They have said repeatedly, in fact, they have actually called us racist for saying that we're scared of Arabic words. That's why we're so afraid of the Intifada. No, we're afraid of the Intifada because the Intifada was the blowing up of school buses and hospitals and nursing homes with the sole purpose of killing Jews. And we're going to treat you seriously like the adults you are and not make excuses. Well, they're just stupid, so don't go hard on them. And let me just add one more point.
They want that.
Right. And let me make one more point. The American people and most citizens of the world can recognize right and wrong. They can recognize justice and injustice. And I cannot forgive and I cannot forget and I cannot make excuses for human beings who looked at the murder of Jewish people, who looked at decapitated individuals, who looked at women bleeding from their crotch, who looked at all of those images and decided to side with the perpetrators. I don't give them any excuses.
How did the Congress meeting and what Elise Stefanik did to Claudine Gay and Bill Ackman, what he did to Claudine Gay, how did that change you? What was your perspective at that moment?
So first, let me tell you something off the record. Sorry, not off the record. Behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes on the record.
Yeah, this is all on the record. Tell something behind the scenes. Really cool. The December 5th testimony, it's funny, FDR said that December 7th would be a day that lived in infamy, which of course is referring to Pearl Harbor. But I think we have to add December 5th as well. That was the date of the congressional hearings where Liz McGill and Claudine Gay and Sally Kornblue testified. When Elise Stefanik asked that now infamous question of did the calls for genocide against Jewish people violate your school policies? And they answered, it depends on the context. Both her and her team were not expecting that answer. They were expecting her to say no. And then the follow-up was going to be, oh, well, if that's the case, how come you're allowing them to scream about, the Intifada or whatever?
Wait, so you're saying Elise Stefanik, let me break it down. So Elise Stefanik was supposed to ask the question. She was just teeing them up.
Yep.
She was
She herself said, I am giving you a softball question. She herself said, I'm going to give you another chance to respond, because no one was expecting them to say, it depends on the context, because that's a moronic answer.
Yeah,
they were just expecting them to say, of course, that's such a terrible thing. And then the follow-up was going to be
that was going to be the hitter.
That's
she was like begging her, please respond.
Exactly. She gave them like 4 or 5 chances. Yeah. But these leaders are so inept. They are so bad at their jobs. They are so morally bankrupt that every one of them said, oh, it depends. We can't make definitive statements.
It's hard to believe that they're this bad. It's hard to really believe realistically that they're so stupid.
Which, by the way, answers the second part of your question. My reaction when I was watching this, and of course the entire Jewish community, or most, again, I shouldn't be the spokesman, most of the Jewish community at Harvard was watching it.
I just want to stop for a second. You can be the spokesperson.
We'll appoint you.
If nobody else is speaking, you can be the spokesperson. And if the people who are hating on you don't speak, shame on them. Okay. So it's the classic thing. It's I could blame it on my wife or whatever. But if she goes, you're going to make a decision for dinner, and I make a decision, and the food sucks, she doesn't get to blame me. Right. So if the Jews have to speak up, if you did not speak, because you were talking about this also before.
I'm
You
sure
said
your
this.
dinner analogy.
You said that.
fits
Whatever.
into that.
Whatever.
To that actually.
Because you have a low bar. You have a low bar for bad food. That's
I
why.
don't know about that.
That's the difference.
You seem to be eating pretty well in my house right
it's
now.
not.
That's
It's
for sure.
mostly my wife's food. That's the real reason. But if they go and you go out and speak, and they chose not to speak up and to go as deep in as you came in, they do not get to bash. I find that inappropriate. I find that childish, and I find that honestly they should be pushing you up. And the more they can push you up, the more people that can get impacted, and they can chime in and help promote you. That's how you build. That's how you build unity. That's not. And the opposite is creating divisiveness. And divisiveness is not what the Jews need and not what the world needs right now. We need people who are the same thing that I reached out to you. And I came up to you when I first saw you at Julia Hart's house. I came up to you. I said, I love what you're doing. You know why? Because instead of going, people go, oh, he didn't speak so well in Congress, or he's doing this for. I just went, you're doing good stuff, and I really like what you're doing, and I'd like to learn more about it. That's how you build a company. That's how you build an establishment. That's how you create a positive movement for the future. So I think let haters hate, as my friend Yair Cheskel came on the podcast, great episode, said, let haters hate, let them hate, and just keep moving on. Sorry for interrupting.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks. So to answer the question, the congressional testimony that most of us were watching was actually incredibly validating, because
revealing.
For the very first time, we were able to look at the TV, point our finger, and say, aha, we told you, we weren't making it up. We are treated qualitatively different than every other group on campus. And don't take our words for it, because you clearly haven't. Take the words of our own president. So yes, it was a unbelievably moronic, idiotic, morally bankrupt answer. But at the same time, it was such a great answer for the Jewish community. She became inadvertently our best spokesman.
I would say also, the whole October 7th, horrific, of course, but I think that the attitude of the Israelis and the idea was that the Hamas is there. They're not so bad. We can work with them. They're not really gonna kill us. They say it, but it's just rhetoric. But I think that's the whole idea. Also, October 7th revealed it. Completely open now. Now you see you can't work with them. They're animals. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
So I think it's on the same. It's people now that you can't run from it now. It's there. You can tell there's no anti-Semitism. What are you talking about? We go downstairs out of our office after November, December, and there's protests there
every day.
Wow.
Like a very serious amount. And I get crazy. And then when I see the Jews with the yarmulke, I just get nuts.
Which I would add is the only time they wear their yarmulke. No, but I'm not even exaggerating. At Harvard, at least, the Jews, and I'm using that term very liberally, the Jews in the encampments, those who are following other Jews on their way to class and monitoring their movements, they started wearing keepas. I had never seen them wear keepas before. I know who they are. I sat in classes with them. All of a sudden, the keepa is so important to them.
Yeah,
interesting.
Because you give them the velvet keepa, so there's two layers. They can really,
right.
You really feel faith.
Those velvet are good. Those are good.
They stick. You can get them the smarty keepas. You can get the big
on the bottom.
You know what you could have done? You could have sold Nachman keepas at that place.
You know what I was actually thinking? At the Republican convention, I realized I'm going to be in front of millions of people, and I'm of course going to be wearing a keepa. I was thinking, why don't I get someone to sponsor a keepa?
Now we're talking.
That's the really Jewish.
Now we're talking.
I could have made so much money.
Tamir Goodman. You know what Tamir Goodman?
Yeah, I know him.
So Tamir Goodman came on the podcast last week, and he said what he did was he's now advertising on the net of the basketball hoop. We're like, this is the most Jewish thing we've ever seen.
So look, if there are any sponsors out there who want to sponsor my keepa, just let me know. I might be meeting Trump in a few weeks. So, if you want him to see your logo on my keepa.
Why don't you ask Trump if he wants to put in Hebrew letters his name on your keepa?
Actually, there are a lot of Jews now who wear a Trump keepa. At the conference I was at this morning. Oh my God. I even saw, I'm not even kidding, I met a Jewish guy who works for RFK Jr., his presidential campaign, and he has an RFK Jr. keepa.
Yeah, of course. All right, so let's talk about this RNC, and how'd you get invited to that? And then how are you drinking that water? It's like poison.
Very thirsty. I'm old.
It's like drinking seawater.
I told you,
don't drink seawater. You let yourself to hydrate on the raft before you drink the seawater.
You've seen my body. I can stand it.
So how'd you get invited to the RNC? And then How'd you get invited to the RNC? And I saw something very interesting, that you did not publicly endorse Trump.
So
how were you able to pull that one off?
Oh, man.
When you were the only person in that room that did not do that?
So
And he's all mad at you now too.
Actually, I'll tell you something funny. When his son, Don Jr., spoke, Trump fell asleep. That's not hyperbole. You could watch the video. He closed his eyes and nodded off.
I thought he was concentrating.
Oh,
on
yeah.
what
He was
his son
really interested in
saying.
what his son was talking about. No, he fell asleep. I don't want to brag, but when I spoke, he gave me a standing ovation.
There you
So
go.
whatever. The story of how I got to the RNC is actually not that interesting. I was driving on my way to a rally in the Hamptons, and I just got a call saying, "Hi, we're from the Trump campaign. We've been following your story." I had been involved with a man who I won't name, but a man who is involved in the Trump campaign. We had got to know each other a little bit, and presumably he was pushing me, but it was really just out of the blue. They said, we really want to amplify your story, talk about your narrative, because what's happening is so unconscionable, so anti-American. And we are here for you. The Trump campaign wants to amplify that. And would you be interested? And before I talk about the politics, let me just say that the things I spoke about are and must be either nonpartisan or bipartisan. If the Democratic Party wants to have me speak at their convention, I would do it in a heartbeat. If they want any Jewish student, if they want the families of hostages there, we would do it in a heartbeat. These are not and should not be partisan. And the amount of crap that I got from my liberal Jews, like in the forward where they wrote 2 hit pieces on me saying I endorsed white nationalism and Christian supremacy and I'm a sellout. Unbelievable. I think if anyone was given the opportunity to speak in front of the former president and possibly the next president, speaking in front of tens of millions of people on camera, to talk about bringing hostages home, to talk about combating anti-Semitism, anyone would do it. And if you didn't do it, you're a moron. And thank God you weren't asked to speak.
That's ridiculous. Yeah. A ridiculous response. But
so I'm fine with the death threats from the far right. And Nick Fuentes went off on me and he got his Nazi trolls. And I'm fine with the far left who think I'm a sellout. I don't care. It's within the Jewish community when they give me crap because you want to criticize me. What have you done to help us? I'm way more interested in that. And it's so easy for them to criticize because most of them haven't done anything.
That's exactly what I was saying before. Yeah. You don't get to say anything unless you do something. Yeah. If I can give you shit and you can give me shit, I don't mind, because the difference is I'm speaking up and you're speaking up. But if I was saying nothing, I can't say anything.
It goes even beyond that, because you're standing up for the Jewish people. However you're doing it, whether it's not exactly the way everybody would like to do it, it doesn't make a difference. You're standing up for the Jewish people. So why are they criticizing you? Right. So, what difference does it make what you're saying? You're standing up for all of us. And if they're criticizing you, that just means that they're criticizing themselves.
Right. Well, thank you for that. I would say, I'm not going to name the names, but prominent people who I even respect and like, who said such awful things, and not even awful things, but things that were just factually inaccurate. So when people were criticizing me for endorsing Trump, as you said in your question, I'll put it this way. Listen to my speech. Listen to the words I said. I was very careful with every word I said. There was a reason for those words. There was a reason for each sentence. And if you want to attack me on the words I say. Don't make assumptions. Don't attack me without even listening. Listen to the speech. So I am proud. I said this at the speech, and I'll say it again. I am proud to support President Trump's policies to expel foreign students who violate the visa system and violate American law. That should not be partisan. And by the way, it is literally against the law. It's just never enforced. If you're a student on a foreign visa and you break the law, you are not only held accountable and go to prison, you are then immediately deported. So the fact that became a talking point by the Jewish left, where I was endorsing, the Harvard Crimson literally had the headline, Kestenbaum endorses plan to deport pro-Palestine protesters. What an accurate, awful thing to say. And it really shows why, at least in the Jewish community, so many people are into Trump now. They can't stand the media. They can't stand all these false accusations and this BS, common sense policies of deporting foreign students who violate American law, which is already the law. All of a sudden, that's a partisan issue, and that's akin to Adolf Hitler. Unbelievable. So I'm proud to support that policy. I am proud to support policies to reinstate patriotism and the values of Western culture and Western civilization back into the classrooms, because there is nothing wrong with the United States as a whole. Do we have problems? Absolutely. Should slavery be taught? Absolutely. That is a critical component of the American education system. But to denigrate the United States as an evil imperialistic outpost, to denigrate our American democracy, which students and professors do
while you're living here,
while they are living here
and taking the benefit of the country.
We should be happy and proud to say that I'm an American. There's nothing wrong with it. And as a proud American, there are problems that I would love to help fix and solve. But burning American flags, being taught that you should burn an American flag, I am proud to support Trump's policies to reinstate love of country. And again, should the Democrats come back to their senses, I'm a registered Democrat. I registered to vote as a Democrat the day I turned 18. I've only voted for Democrats. Should they decide to return to those common sense policies, I'm all in. Let's do it. So I endorsed that. And there was another policy of endorsing a president who was willing to stand up to terrorism, terrorists, and their supporters. The fact that it was revealed by the National Security Council about 3 weeks ago that Iran is funding anti-Israel and anti-American protesters on college campuses, the fact that that was revealed 3 weeks ago, not as conjecture, not as hyperbole, not as an exaggeration, but as a matter of fact, and there has been radio silence from the Biden, or I guess at this point, let's just call it the Harris administration, the fact that they have not said anything about it, the fact that they have not commented on what they're going to do to combat that, to prevent it from happening again, is scary. And it is shocking that is a partisan issue.
The Jews feel very concerned, and we have a lot of Jews who are left-leaning, right-leaning. Regardless, the Jews are very concerned right now with what's going on in the country and where the country is steering. I don't think that there's going to be. We're optimists, or at least I'm. Are you an optimist?
I've been around longer, less.
No, but you're pretty optimistic. Things are good and always get better.
If it goes the wrong way in November, we're talking about maybe time to move to Israel.
Yeah, some of the Jews are a little bit more scared.
I assume what you mean by if things go wrong in November, but I'm not going to ask.
We don't endorse any candidate. We don't support anything, but that is a good way to put it, and that we're going to leave it because he's more controversial than I am in that stuff. But the ultimate point is that a lot of people are waking up and going, I support, and I actually heard this today because I called a friend of mine, and I don't want to say names. I called him, and I was requested to be a delegate for something. And I called my friend, and I was a little concerned because he's a little more right-leaning than I am. And I didn't feel comfortable. And I called my friend who's very left. And I asked him, and he said, we, the left Jews in general, very liberal, and he's gay, so in the gay Jewish community, don't support Trump. Fine, no problem. But we support a lot of Trump's policies. Yep. And we feel that Kamala Harris has the same policies. She just says it differently. She's just not loud and grandstanding and things like that. That's what he said to me. He goes, but we support the Trump policies. And he was trying to speak for as many people as he possibly can. But I thought that was actually pretty interesting. So let's move past the politics of the RNC.
So was he supporting Harris at the end? I don't understand.
He's supporting Harris. He just feels that Harris is
going to be the same policies?
Same policies as Trump.
That's crazy.
So it's everybody takes it for the way that they want to take it, but that's what he was saying to me today. So going past the RNC, you've built this resilient time, and you've been very resilient. So I have a 3 rapid fire questions because I don't want to capitalize on your time. One is, where are you now? Are you done with Harvard?
Yeah, so I just graduated from Harvard. I'm doing a.
Oh, you graduated from Harvard even during all this stuff.
Oh yeah,
nice.
I'm not going to let them.
How many years did that take? How many years were you there?
2 years.
And that's divinity school.
Yep. There was actually an option to do a 3rd year, but for many reasons, I decided.
I feel like we could have turned the lights off and just gone to divinity from your face. I think that would have been perfect.
So I'm currently doing a fellowship with the Tikva Fund, where I'm working on these issues and also trying to create a Holocaust curriculum in light of October 7th, because we don't feel that Holocaust museums or Holocaust curriculums themselves really focus on the part 2, which is resilience and building the Jewish state. And you wouldn't talk about the civil rights. You wouldn't talk about slavery without talking about the civil rights movement and the gains that the African-American community had 100 years later. So you should probably do the same thing with the Holocaust. Anyways, and then I hope to pursue a career in public policy or just being an advocate for the Jewish community. I am sort of riding the wave at this point, speaking at all the Jewish conferences and non-Jewish conferences, speaking out about the dangers within higher education and within academia. And I will keep doing that for as long as people are willing to listen. And what that will look like professionally, I'm not quite sure yet. But what I will say is, again, I'm in this space. I've been incredibly fortunate to be given a platform, and I will continue to use that platform to advocate for the community that I grew up in and the community that I love.
Yeah, I love that you're doing it. So you've been very resilient during this time, and your voice has become so resilient. where did you get this defining moment in your life that allowed you to be so tough that pushes
growing up in Teaneck? What are you talking about?
Growing up in Teaneck.
What's the question?
The anti-Semitism on the streets of Briarcliff Road in Teaneck, New Jersey.
Churchill,
River Road.
From River Road. What's the C? Yeah, from the River Road to
Churchill.
So, first of all, I'm flattered. I disagree, but I appreciate the compliment regardless. I'm not saying this to sound braggadocious or arrogant or haughty in any way. I don't really view what I'm doing as brave or as resilient or as noteworthy.
No, but you get hate. You get hate on. You keep going.
Well, that's because I just have no other option. I mean, when people tell me to kill myself, I'm not going to do it. So, you just keep living. I really don't. That's a funny line.
Very defined.
Yeah, I'm going to write that down. I just had an attitude.
Resiliency, the definition.
Yeah. I really took an attitude. I really just took an attitude of, these are my beliefs. This is, I don't want to say my truth because that's been corrupted by the left, but this is the truth, let's say, and I'm going to fight for it. And not once did I think that I would abandon these spaces. Not once did I think that I was going to acquiesce to I don't want to say the woke mob because that's also been hijacked by the right, but not once did I think I would acquiesce to this radical mob that hate me, hate our freedoms, and hate the United States. I really do think that if more Jews just spoke up, especially on college campuses, we would be in a much better and different place. But people are scared, and I can understand why. And people are nervous about social isolation, and I can understand why. I didn't have that many friends beforehand, but I certainly lost the 3 friends I had. And people are scared about the professional blowback. I understand why. But again, this is a defining moment in Jewish history. This will be recorded in the history books. And you want to be remembered as someone who stood up and someone who was counted, not someone who just laid low, took off the keepa, and pretended that it wasn't a problem. And
but we know where that's led to in the past for our people.
Exactly.
Over the last thousands and thousands of years.
Exactly. I've never been this proud to be Jewish. I have never been this proud to stand up for the Jewish people, for the Jewish state, to wear a keepa, to pray, to be part of the Jewish community. I've never been this proud to do it, because when our values are so clearly contrasted by our ideological opponents, those on college campuses who burn flags, who harass Jews on their way to class, who call for an intifada, and those, of course, on a more extreme level in the Middle East, who throw gays off roofs, who butcher women and slaughter babies, I've never been so proud to contrast that with our Jewish values. And I can't understand why that is considered a noteworthy position to take. And I won't say the organization, but an organization just reached out to me a couple of days ago, and they want to honor me at their dinner in DC. I'm very flattered, and Elise Stefanik will be there, so I obviously accepted. But I really didn't do much. I just complained, and I've been complaining my whole life. The only difference is now people are listening. So my message
Jews are good complainers.
Exactly, my message to Jews is just keep complaining.
But seriously, joke. I'm a professional complainer.
Yeah, there you go. So seriously, just speak the truth that is true. Speak the values that you were raised in. That's all I've been doing. And it was never a consideration that I would do anything different. Has it been lonely? Yes. Has it been scary? Yes. Do I wish I was not in this position? Yes. But ultimately, for whatever reason, I was at Harvard at a really challenging time to be a Jew at Harvard, and I took a stand. And it's not noteworthy because if I can do it, anyone else can do it. And they could do it a whole lot better than I did.
Well, Shabbos, how can people find you? How can people get in touch with you? Is there any last points that you want to give to our audience?
Where do I live? The anti-Semites are trying to find out, so I'm not telling. I'm on social media. So my Instagram is my name, Shabbos Kest. My Twitter, I'm actually very active. I don't want to brag, but Bill Ackman follows me on Twitter. The Satmar Hasidic community follows me on Twitter. I don't
know if that's good or bad.
Yeah, I don't know
I thought you said you didn't want to tell the anti-Semites.
I have like 100 Congress members follow me on Twitter, Democrat and Republican alike, which is amazing. Cool. I have like cool people follow me on Twitter. Douglas Murray, I think, follows me, or he at least at one point did. I think he unfollowed me.
Unfollowed.
Yeah. Douglas, if you're listening, what the hell?
I thought we were friends. Yeah. I thought we had something, Douglas.
But my Twitter is Shabbos K, like the letter. So I'm active on those 2 social media channels. I'm also going to post updates on our lawsuit to keep the public informed. So I'm active in those spaces. And then I really speak on as many conventions or conferences or organizations that will have me. So if you're in the Jewish nonprofit world, chances are I will be fortunate enough to be speaking there.
I think just one last question I had was, what kind of time frame do you see for the lawsuit?
It's a good question. So the lawsuit at NYU, for example, I would say is a I would like to think is a good indicator. NYU is the first major university to have a lawsuit. And again, it was filed by the legal team that represents me as well at Harvard. And they just had a settlement about 2-3 weeks ago. The settlement is really good, really good.
What does really good mean?
So number one, there is damages, whether that means punitive damages or tuition reimbursements, it's unclear. And, I know the plaintiff, she's great, but she is not at liberty to say, but there is money involved. NYU will have to pay, which is significant. They admit wrongdoing, and there are consequences to that wrongdoing. Number two, they will have an independent monitor to make sure that NYU is in compliance with their obligations under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Number three, that independent monitor will have to report to the university and say exactly what it is they're doing right, what it is they're doing wrong. NYU has agreed to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which is a major victory. And they will go through curriculums to overhaul any anti-Semitism that has seeped its way into the classrooms. So I was very clear with my lawyers, and I've been very clear on television and really to anyone. If Harvard, maybe I shouldn't say, maybe my lawyers will be upset at me for saying this, but if Harvard wants to settle, I will settle if and only if 3 basic conditions are met. Number one, there has to be payment. Not because I want the money, I mean, I do, but because there has to be punishment to their wrongdoing. Whether it's $1 or $1 million, it's irrelevant. There must be money.
We'll take the million.
We'll take the million.
No, otherwise, they don't feel it.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it's not true. That's not
same thing. People have to pay.
Exactly. There must be a net loss. There must be consequences to the unimaginable crap that I and the other 5 plaintiffs went through this past year. They have to pay, literally. I will not accept any other settlement that doesn't include that. I will also not accept any settlement that does not include a clear, articulated plan of the policies they will implement to combat anti-Semitism. I always say that if Harvard wanted to combat anti-Semitism, they would have done it already. We are now 9-10 months after October 7th. They have not instituted one single policy, or new policy, I should say, in response. So Harvard must say what they're going to do to prevent the past year from ever happening again. And again, that should not be controversial. That should not be partisan. It also should not have taken a lawsuit for them to do it. They should have done it on their own goodwill and common sense, but obviously they don't have any. So we'll use the lawsuit. And number 3, there must be disciplinary actions taken to students and to professors who violated not only Massachusetts state law, but violated Harvard's own internal code of conduct. In the same way that Harvard has to pay, they have to be held accountable. The students and the professors that Harvard has promoted, accepted, and normalized, they must be disciplined. There must be consequences to harassing Jews. Enough is enough. We are sick and tired of being sick and tired. If those 3 conditions are met, I'm ready to settle tomorrow.
Shabbos, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate what you're doing. We're standing right there on the side with you. If you ever need a friend, you can just always reach out to us and we'll talk and we can go through stuff together, and we'll be fighting every day and fighting every step of the way, and we'll never stop.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here.